Shalom, everyone. At the last two chapters, we discussed death penalty in Tanakh, and then death penalty during the time of the second temple, especially towards the end. And we saw sources through the pseudo-epigraph and apocryph and Josephus, and a little bit of what we have in the Talmud, reflecting the time of the end of Beit Sheni. This time, I'd like to focus on the majority of our sources and maybe the most important part, historical part, and that is the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, meaning the Amoraim of Bavel and of Eretz Israel. And before I share the sources, I'd like to emphasize a few things regarding what we saw and what is the difference about what we're going to see now. When we looked at the different penalties in Tanakh, we saw that death penalty is indeed part of what the Torah is asking as a punishment for severe sins, and the only severe punishment is death penalty. However, the Torah doesn't tell us, except for few cases, how shall we kill. How should the Beit Din kill the criminal? And the only two options that we do find in Tanakh is burning and stoning. What we find in the Mishnah is, first of all, not only two ways of killing of death penalty, but also another two ways of killing by a sword or a scythe or strangling. And the question, and we have a few questions here. Why did Chazal add something to what is explicit in the Torah? Why didn't they leave it with a srifa and skela, burning and stoning? And the other big question that is different than the question of death penalties that we saw during Beit Sheni is the fact that there is no Sanhedrin. There is no court that has the power to not only judge the person, but also execute. Sorry. Oh, okay. I'm going to continue. But also a Beit Din that will execute the punishment. So we are dealing here, all the sources in Chazal, we're dealing here with only theoretical discussions, not something that Chazal actually did. But the discussion apparently is very, very important to them, including the different ways that the Beit Din can kill a criminal which was sentenced to a death penalty. So let me share the sources and let's see what we have. And I'd like to start with a Mishnah in Masechet Makot. It's the Masechet following Masechet Sanhedrin, and there in Masechet Makot we hear that a Sanhedrin that would execute somebody once in 7 years would be considered destructive. And I want you to see the 7 years in the Hebrew. It says Sanhedrin haoreget beshavua. Does the Mishnah really mean 1 week? Like if you kill a person per week, that means that you are a destructive Sanhedrin? Where does the English take the seven years? It's in most of the Mefarshim. For example, Rabbeinu Ovadia Bartenura is telling us 1 week is one in 7 years, and that's very much like the Torah. Let's speak about a week, also in a Shabbat, also in a sense of 7 years. But nevertheless, it's either 1 week or even 7 years. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying once in 70 years. And we see how we start, from every week, which maybe sounds reasonable, then to even in once in 7 years. That's enough for this Sanhedrin to be called destructive. But Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and now I want to put him in time because that is relevant to our discussion. Okay, The Tanna Kama is saying once in a week, whether it's really literally a week or like the Torah, 7 years. When we get to the time of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who is in Yavne after the destruction of the second temple. In other words, we're talking about discussions after the destruction. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying even once in 70 years is too much. And Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, that are also a crucial part of the generations after the destruction of the temple, between the destruction in year 70 and Bar Kokhba rebellion in the year of 132, they were friends, and Rabbi Akiva was a student of Rabbi Tarfon, and then they were friends, and they both are saying, if we were on Sanhedrin, nobody would have ever been executed. And that's really interesting. They're both know, again, we have to understand everything is theoretical. There is no Sanhedrin because there's no Beit Mikdash. But they want to play with that thought. If we were there, nobody would have ever died. Meaning we would never sentence a person in the death penalty. Why? We'll see in a minute. But as a contra to them, we find Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. This is Rabban Shimon, the son of Rabban Gamliel of Yavne, the big teacher of both Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. And his son, meaning the next generation, he's looking at them and he's saying, seriously? They too would have increased violence in Israel. If you were in the Sanhedrin and you say you would never sentence a person to death, the result will be increase in violence. And we hear here the tension. Even though it's a theoretical tension, it has also to do with values and moral. So as opposed to the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva that says minimum, nothing of people deciding other people, sentencing other people to death, because it's not something we can be ever sure that we are right. The other opinion, the other side is, if we're not going to have death penalty in our law, then violence will increase amongst us. And then maybe other people will get hurt just because you didn't want to sentence a person to death. And this tension in the time of the Mishnah and later in the time of the Amoraim is what we are going to find throughout the sources of the Mishnah and the Talmud. And another example, in Masechet Sanhedrin, regarding the idea that a witness, we are questioning the witnesses very, very thoroughly. And a witness, and the sages thought in the Baraita, how does the court describe testimony based on conjecture? In other words, if someone comes in and is like, I think I saw, I have an assumption that this is what happened. What do? The court says to the witness, perhaps you saw this man about whom you are testifying pursuing another into ruin, and you pursued him and found a sword in his hand dripping with blood, and the one who was ultimately killed was convulsing. If you saw only this, it is as if you saw nothing, and you cannot testify for the murder. In other words, how do we understand, how do we realize, or how do we decide that a witness is just close to testifying and close to telling us what happened, rather than just imagining or saying things that are near what happened and not exactly what happened? Even if everything that he saw makes sense to say, and this person killed that person with blood and with a bleeding sword, that's not enough, because what they're looking for is the actual act. And if you cannot testify in the actual act, that means we cannot sentence that person with a sword to death. Very, very careful from making a wrong decision and killing an innocent people. And the Chazal are bringing it to the limit almost as if to really support Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon is saying, like, we would never be able to ever decide that somebody killed another person, and that's why he needs to have a death penalty. Maybe a hint of that, or an idea of that, we can find in the fact that one of the seven uh, um, uh, descendants of Noah, um, the commandments that they're also are also um, obligated to keep, and all are as following. And the descendants of Noah, as it says here, it's all of humanity. In other words, Am Yisrael has their own moral commandments, and also the rest of the world have that. And the seven mitzvot that the rest of the world, the rest of humanity, all of humanity are commanded in, is also establishing courts of judgment. And establishing courts of judgment, it means that we are seeking the truth about what happened before we're sentencing people to death. But it's also a prohibition of blasphemy, idol worshiping, and forbidding sexual relations, and murder. Again, robbery, eating a limb from a living animal. Murder and court here is very, very important. Every human being on earth is supposed to respect the image of God in the another person and within ourselves. And if someone murdered, he has to come to court and he has to get his punishment, okay? Because life is very dear. And when we go back again to hear the different examples that we find in Chazal regarding that idea of that it's not easy for a Beit Din, for the Sanhedrin, for court to sentence a person to death, even though we're playing with that idea because it says so in the Torah, and during Beit Sheni, we heard a few cases doing that. We hear, for example, in Baba Metzia, they brought Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, to the authorities. Let me just explain. Again, we're talking here about a generation after the generation, that's a second generation after Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Elazar is the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the student of Rabbi Akiva. And during his time, we're talking about Roman ruling in Eretz Israel. The Roman authorities take Rabbi Elazar and appoint him to a task. What's the task? To tell them about thieves and about murders and about criminals around living around in the Jewish communities. So they brought Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, to the authorities, who appointed him to this task, and he proceeded to arrest thieves. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha sent Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, the following message: "You are vinegar, son of wine. Your father was an important person. Your father was a Talmid Chacham. You, compared to him, are like vinegar. You are wicked in comparison to your father, the righteous Rabbi Shimon. Just as vinegar is spoiled wine, until when you will inform the nation of your God to be sentenced to execution by the Gentiles' king court." What are you doing? You're cooperating with the enemy, with the Gentiles' court, with the Romans. You are giving them Jews to be sentenced, and maybe those Jews will also be sentenced to death. How do you do that to the nation of God? And Rabbi Shimon's answer is, and Rabbi Shimon sent a message back to him: "I am merely eradicating thorns from the vineyard. You are accusing me of being just a chometz, just being a vinegar. What I am doing is I'm cleaning the vineyard, the kerem. I'm giving Am Yisrael, I'm doing Am Yisrael a favor. I am removing the wicked from the Jewish people." And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha sent back to him, "Let the owner of the vineyard, God, come and eradicate his own thorns. It is not your place to do this." And it's echoing again, not only what you're doing to your own brothers and sisters, but just for the option that these people can be sentenced to death. This is that's not in the hands of people. That is also only in the hands of God. And so let the owner of the vineyard take care of them. Don't step in front of God instead of God to help to decide who deserves to die, who deserves a punishment. So we're talking here during the time of Amora'eh, of the end of the Tkufat Tanaim, and the feeling is like, yes, there is a court that sentenced people to death, but they're Gentiles. Us, we are very, very careful about doing so, especially after the destruction of the temple. And that entire discussion is theoretical. Here, it's not theoretical because there's a Jew who decided that it's okay to tell about his people, but he's saying, I'm only taking care of criminals. But Rabbi Yehoshua is saying the moral principle in Judaism is you don't decide who gets to die. It's only God. Another source that shows us the tension between the idea that in the Torah allows to kill different people who committed different serious sins, to the fact that Chazal are very careful about that. And that example is about Ben Sorer Umoreh. So let's see what it says in Sanhedrin about Ben Sorer Umoreh. And Rabbi Shimon is saying, because the child ate, a certain kind of luxury meat and drank, an Italian wine that are very, very rich and expensive, his mother and father should stone him. Now let's look at this question. Rabbi Shimon is not asking a question to the Beit Din. Rabbi Shimon is asking a question about the Torah. He is questioning what is written in the Torah that says that Ben Sorer Umoreh, that eats too much and drinks too much, and becomes corrupted by his eating and drinking, that his father and mother should kill him, should stone him. And Rabbi Shimon is saying, I don't understand the rationale behind it. Ela, lo haya velo atid liyot. Rabbi Shimon is saying, excuse me, this never happened. Why the Torah wrote it as a case? It says, Drosh v'kabel sachar, because we need to learn, we need to theoretically deal with the ideas of who is not appropriately behave and what would they have get if we had to punish them. But God forbid, says Rabbi Shimon, it's not literally. There was never a case of a Ben Sorer Umoreh that his parents stoned him. But next to that, says Rabbi Yonatan, I saw him. I sat by his grave. Again, the tension. Rabbi Shimon says, ideally, I cannot accept that. And Rabbi Yonatan saying, listen, I saw that person and I sat by his grave. In other words, yes, there were times that in Israel they executed death penalty by stoning to a Ben Sorer Umoreh. Again, the tension. The further we go, we're away from Beit Shani and the Torah, the more we understand that Chazal don't want to, looking at the death penalty in a very, very cautious and suspicious way. I want to get now to more of the principles. And for example, we find in Masechet Shabbat that any judge who judges a true just judgment truthfully, even if he sits in judgment only 1 hour, the verse describes him as if he becomes partner of the Holy One, blessed be he, in the act of creation. In other words, there's a very interesting saying here in Masechet Shabbat that when we judge truthfully, we're becoming partners of God in creation. And this conclusion is derived by mean of verbal analogy. And it is written here, and the people stood over Moshe from the morning until evening. And it's written there in the act of creation, and it was evening and it was morning. Okay, so So that the analogy, we can leave the analogy aside whether we agree with it or not. But the point is that it's important for the Gemara to tell us that to be to have a true judgment, to judge truthfully, is so important. And in the case of a death penalty, Chazal realized or understood or choose to say that there is no case of death penalty that they think they can be truly sure that that person can be sentenced to death, even if it's just theoretically, again. But just the idea that us as a Jewish court can decide someone should be killed because of a sin, a severe sin that he did. And another example I wanted to show you is the following midrash in the Sifrei of Zuta, and there it says they established that they will kill at the regel. Okay, in other words, when are we going to sentence and bring people to court to decide to the ones who deserve to die? It's going to be during the Shlosha Regalim, where the people of Israel are in Yerushalayim and the court is assembling in the Sanhedrin, and that is the times where we're going to decide that who are the people who deserve death penalty. And then the Midrash continues and say, and how do you know they strike him with stone, arrows, and spears? In other words, okay, so it happens during the regal, and in what way did what was the method of killing people who were sentenced to death? Strike them with stone, arrows, and spears, and they learn it from death will be put onto thee, mot yumat, different way of death. But that's not what I brought this midrash for. The end is going to strike us, because the end of the midrash says it only happened when the Sanhedrin is in place. What is the law when the Sanhedrin is not in place? Okay. The discussion here and the question here that Chazal keeps asking themselves after the destruction of the temple, during the Mishnah time and during the Gemara time. Now that we don't have Sanhedrin, can we do that? Can we sentence people to death with different methods? Again, stone, arrows, and spears? Because we know it happened during the Sanhedrin time, but what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? And the answer is the following: if a person is liable to be stoned, his house falls on him, or an animal drags him. In other way, the concept was turned into everything is in the hand of Shamayim, not just onesh karet, which is in the Torah already. It's God will decide how to punish that person. Chazal understands that they don't have the power anymore and the legitimacy, and maybe they don't even have the will to sentence people to death. And that's why they say, even if we know that there's a person who sinned and he is liable to be stoned and liable to a death penalty, God will take care of that. Either his house will fall on him or an animal will drag him, but it's not going to be us. It's too much for us to decide that he deserves to die and how to kill him. And that brings us back to the beginning of Sanhedrin, with the discussions of how to kill people. And Arba Mitot, 4 forms of capital punishment were given over the court: stoning, burning, decapitation, and strangulation. And Rabbi Shimon says we say it in a different way. In other words, even though Chazal understands that it's theoretically, first of all, they want to learn it in order to know what happened, but they're also adding, as I started, they're adding hereg v'chenek, decapitation and strangulation, which were not in the Torah. And the question is, how come they were able to add ways of killing that are not in the Torah? And we'll keep that question to the end. With that, I want to show you another interesting Mishnah that is taking us deeper into the moral rationale behind it, the ethical ideas, that the principles that guided Chazal in how they dealt with death penalty. And it says in the Mishnah in chapter 4, how do we inspire awe in the witnesses in a capital case? We bring them into the court chamber and press them. Perhaps what you saw is but your own assessment, or from rumors, or you're witnessing an actual witnesses, you're witnessing an actual witnesses testify, or you're reporting what a truthworthy said, or perhaps you were unaware that by the end would interrogate you with examination and inquiry. Know that capital cases are not like monetary ones. In monetary cases, can return the person, the false witness can return the money and achieve atonement. But in capital cases, the blood of the victim and all his future offsprings hang upon you until the end of time. It's a serious responsibility to decide that you witnessed murder. If you're a false witness, you can pay, but not if you're not in capital punishment. Then the blood of the blood of the victim will continue to follow and chase you for the rest of your life and the rest of your offsprings, right? And his offsprings. In other words, you're not going to escape your false testimony or your mistaken testimony. That's why we are threatening you. And they bring, for thus we find in regard to Cain, who killed his brother, the blood of your brother screams out. And the brother, and then, this is exactly the same thing. The blood of your brother is screaming out because it was his blood, also the blood of his future offspring, that are screaming out, not one bloods, because it's also the offsprings. And continue the Mishnah and says, it was for this reason why the man was first created as one person. And we start to, and the Mishnah is starting to elaborate the principle, the ethical idea, to teach you that anyone who destroys life is considered by scripture to have destroyed an entire world. And anyone who saves life is as if he saved an entire world. In other words, if we kill someone and it's a mistake, we didn't only destroy that person, we destroyed an entire universe, an entire world, his world, everything that he could have done, and also the offsprings that could have come from that person. And also to promote peace among the creature, that no man would say to his friend, my ancestors are greater than yours. In other words, no, we all came from the same person. To say, to bring peace, the opposite of that peace is that people will say, I'm more important than you. Then what? Then it's very easy to kill you. There's no reason why you should not kill a person that I view as less than me. Man was the first creature created as one person, of course, man and woman, one creature, ha'adam, just that no one can say my family is more important than your family. And also to express the grandeur, the grandeur of the Holy One, blessed be he. For a man strikes many coins from the same die, and all the coins are alike, but the king, but the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be he, strikes every man from the die of the first human being, and yet no human being is quite like his friend. every person is different. Every person is unique. When you murder someone, and it wasn't when you murder someone, you are erasing that uniqueness from from the world. Therefore, every person must say, "For my sake, the world was created." And maybe you will, and then we go back to the judges and the witness, and they tell him, and the judge's speech continued to the witness. Maybe you, the witness, will now say, "Why do we need this and all this anxiety for? Let's not come forward even with true testimony." Okay, now we're flipping to the other side. We went through all this just to threaten them, to tell them how serious it is if their testimony is going to lead to killing somebody who did not deserve to die. So they can say, okay, you know what? It's too much. It's scary. Even if we have a true testimony, maybe we're better off not testify at all. But Scripture has already spoken. If he be witness, having seen or know, if he does not express it, he shall bear his sin. Maybe you will now say, why do we need this? To be responsible for another man's death? But Scripture has already spoken. When the wicked are destroyed, there is rejoicing. And even that Mishnah at the end puts us again in that tension. It's so important to report and to witness someone who is murdering, someone who is in a vicious and wicked way, killing other people and not respecting their image of God. But in the other hand, if people are going to be so scared to testify because it's going to be upon themselves and the rest of their descendants, they'll say maybe we shouldn't do it at all. The tension between, if it's a true testimony, we can do it, you should do it, you must do it, because you're helping peace in the world. With peace in the world, you're helping with rejoicing in the world. On the other hand, when you're doing wrongly for the wrong reasons or false testimony and you're not sure enough, then you're adding killing for no reason, and that is as worse as not eradicating wicked people. And again, I want to remind us all that again we are talking about a theoretical discussion, a principle discussion in principle, in values. This is a topic which is at the core of the morals and the ethics of Judaism. We are not putting our head in the sand, ignoring wicked people, but we are not taking it easily to decide people needs to die. And the discussion is important in order to find, the line between what is ethical and what is wrong as human beings. And I want to end with the Mishnah in Masechet Avot that touches our topic. And the Mishnah says the following. And he used to say, beloved is a man, for he was created in the image of God. Especially beloved is he, for it was known to him that he had been created in the image of God. For in the image of God, he made men. Beloved are Israel, that they were called children, to all to the all present. And especially beloved they, for it was made known to them that they are called children of the all present. And as it is said, you are children to the Lord your God. Beloved are Israel, that a precious vessel was given to them. Especially beloved are they, for it was made known to them that the desirable instrument with which the world had been created was given to them, as it is said, for I give you good instruction, forsaken not my teachings. The instrument that God gave us is the Torah. And the Torah is the teaching of God. When we hold that and we're going according to the laws of ethics and to the moral laws of God, and we ask ourselves, how should we behave? Then we respect the image of God that we were created with. And If we and one of the understandings of Chazal, uh, as we go along chronologically away from the time of the Torah, that Chazal understands that there were ideas that were according to the time of the Torah, with stoning and burning, and it continued to be during the time of the Second Temple. But when it comes to the time of Chazal, after the destruction, and there's no Sanhedrin, Chazal understand that it's too much to take upon yourself death penalty and to kill people. And part of it is their theological values, social values, moral values, and and they didn't want to leave it alone. That's why they kept discussing it. And one of the options that the scholars are giving, both Professor Aaron Shemesh and Professor Halbertal and Professor Leuberboim, are telling us about why Chazal added those two ways of killing people, according to the Beit Din. Why did they add those two, hereg v'chenek, strangulation and decapitation, even though we had to in the Torah? Because those two ways of killing are not destroying the image of a person. It doesn't irricate, um, it doesn't touch the structure of a person. Burning and stoning are destroying the image of a person, but strangling is keeping the body is being kept intact, and Chazal viewed that as a more moral way of killing people. So even though during the time of the Second Temple, we hear in the different books that people were still being stoned or being burned, when it comes to the time of the Chachamim, they were, let's say, humanizing the punishment in one hand, again, a theoretical discussion, but are also taking everything up to God and telling God, we cannot, this is not something we can take responsibility for. It's in your hands. You do what you think is good to do. We entered a period of time that Chazal, understanding that they're under the ruling of a different nation in the Roman nations, and it's not even up to them, but the theoretical discussion was there in order to strengthen the ethical, moral behaviors of the people of Israel.